Hi, I'm Catalina.
Hi, I'm Petra.
And I'm Holly, and we're doing our presentation on sex trafficking. Imagine a crime that's so invisible that its victims could walk right past us without us even knowing. Teenagers, children, and adults of any gender or sexuality have been entrapped in this worldwide issue, and most people are completely unaware. Modern day slavery is not just history, it is happening right now in our city and neighborhoods.
Sex trafficking is a grave violation of human rights. It steals dignity, freedom, and safety of millions across the world. We must recognize, confront, and end this injustice because it is morally and socially unacceptable.
To start us off, what is sex trafficking? By definition, sex trafficking is the exploitation of individuals by deceiving and coercing them into sexual acts against their will, often for profit. Human sex trafficking has become a $32 billion industry that roughly affects 27 million people around the world.
These victims aren't just numbers, they are people who have been robbed of their basic human rights, trapped in this complex system by force, fraud, and coercion. And it happens in all kinds of places: hotels, motels, massage parlors, truck stops, brothels, clubs, online platforms, and even residential homes.
So, where did this issue start? Sex trafficking has origins that can be traced all the way back to the transatlantic slave trade, which began in the 1500s. During this major historical event between the 1500s and the 1800s, 9.9 million Africans were captured and forcibly transferred across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, where they would then be sold and forced to work as slaves for the rest of their lives.
Today, the forms of exploitation are no less cruel. Today's victims of sex trafficking are often referred to as modern slaves, and when we compare the modern slaves to the slaves in the past, not only are the victims cheaper, but they are more disposable. In today's terms, an enslaved person in the 1800s would cost about $40,000. But today's sex trafficking victims are bought for as little as $2,500 to $3,500.
Sadly, sex trafficking has been able to persist all of these years because the traffickers prey on the vulnerable, those who are seeking jobs, access to education, or desperate for a way out of poverty. Either way, sex trafficking today and sex trafficking 500 years ago shares the common thread of gaining profit at the price of human suffering.
Okay, so who is involved? The people who are normally involved are typically migrant or refugee children, or individuals who are financially desperate, or anyone lacking the support or opportunity they need. These are traffickers' prime targets. We also have a video of a real life survivor from the sex trafficking world who shares their story and how they got trapped into the dangerous system.
New at 6 tonight, it is a Sacramento dirty little secret. One of 18 U.S. cities singled out by the FBI as a hotspot for human trafficking, including child prostitution.
One of those victims is telling her story tonight. As Danielle Lee reports, she hopes it motivates others to watch for signs of trouble and do something about it before it's too late.
I was slapped once, I was spit on. Stacy Lundgren says her middle school years were pure hell. It got to the point where eighth grade, I was tormented a lot, to the point where I tried to kill myself. The victim of relentless bullying, she turned to her family, her teachers, and other trusted adults for help. No one listened.
This was what drove me to the internet of just that was my escape from everything. And so that was where he kind of came in.
Stacy struck up an online friendship with a 22-year-old man. She was just 14 years old.
We ended up meeting at a local school, and he picked me up. Here I am, 14, and he's 22, and I was like, well, I must be cool because I'm a 22-year-old isn't interested in me.
He gave her the attention she craved.
I thought that he loved me, but it was a relationship, but it was twisted.
In time, her one-on-one relationships turned into sex trafficking.
The first time I went out, I remember I was on the corner, and I heard a voice tell me to go back, and that I knew better. He just had just that so much of a just control over me that what he said I would do.
Freed physically, Stacy found herself emotionally tied to the man who sold her for sex.
At this point, I was just a mess. Just that was what my identity was, and now he was gone.
Danielle Lee, KCRA 3 reports.
Now imagine if someone you knew, a friend, classmate, or neighbor that was impacted by this crime. How would that change your perspective on this serious issue that we have in our community? Obviously, the traffickers profit immensely, facing a low risk and high reward. In 2024, the U.S. State Department released a report that had counted around 19,000 prosecutions on traffickers. Only 7,000 of those convictions, 7,000 convictions were made of those human trafficking cases, showing how difficult it is bringing those traffickers to justice and allows them to think that they can still get away with this cruelty.
On the other hand, while the traffickers enjoy all the benefits and profits, the victims end up with lifelong scars. Physical injuries, such as untreated diseases and sexual trauma, they also gain a heavy amount of mental trauma like anxiety and shame and fear of being re-trafficked, not to mention the piles of debt and ruined credit that victims gain throughout this experience that is nearly impossible for them to rebuild.
Even if you're not firsthand involved, as God forbid, a victim or a trafficker of human sex trafficking, you are still just as affected by this issue. With the issue of sex trafficking communities, we feel unsafe as the cycle of exploitation and poverty continues to make people feel vulnerable and susceptible to being trafficked. There's also a certain stigma that is created by our community about the individuals who have been trafficked, which ultimately creates a lack of support that keeps the few survivors isolated and still at risk for being trafficked once again.
Well, first of all, it's a violation of human rights as it strips away people's freedom, dignity, and safety that destroys people's lives. These survivors of being trafficked face lasting trauma, illnesses, and societal exclusion. It collectively damages the safety of communities as it fosters poverty and perpetuates social inequalities. And overall, no society should tolerate commodification of human beings for any reason.
How to fight. So it starts off with learning to recognize the issue and to know the signs and indications that someone is being sex trafficked, to possible help and just overall bring awareness to the issue.
Getting involved in your community by volunteering and supporting organizations that fight against sex trafficking is a great way to help with the battle against it. Also, advocating for stronger protection and resources helps the survivors rebuild.
It's also important to have empathy, not just for the issue of sex trafficking alone, but everywhere in life. As Cornel West said, empathy is not simply a matter of trying to imagine what others are going through, but having the will to muster enough courage to do something about it. In a way, empathy is predicted upon hope.
In conclusion, sex trafficking is a deeply entrenched crisis affecting millions of people today, meaning it isn't someone else's problem or distant issue.
Addressing it requires both public awareness, stronger laws, survivor support, and above all, confronting the social inequalities that let this issue thrive.
We all have a role to play in recognizing injustice, acting with empathy, and working towards a world where no one is exploited. Thank you.